My name is Gina. I work part-time as a caregiver. I've been married for over 27 years and have now entered my 50s. Our children are already adults and have left home, so it was just my husband and me living together. The reason I say is that I'm currently living in my childhood home. My father passed away when I was 48, and since then, I've been living with my mother, just the two of us. I'm home. Mom, I'm back. After finishing my morning shift, I returned home to find my mother sitting on the bed, staring blankly at one point. I'm home. Mom. What are you looking at? Receiving no response, I go over to her and take her hand. She then notices me and looks up, but doesn't say anything. So, I tried to speak to her again. I ran into the helper on my way home. I heard that you're doing well, Mom. Helper? What's that? Ms. Smith has been coming over. Do you recognize her? I don't know. Who is she? Does she come to our house? After answering, my mother starts staring at the same spot as before. I'm not sure if it's because of my father's passing, but about a year after he died, she developed dementia. Initially, her dementia was mild and didn't affect daily life, but recently, she's been forgetting even those close to her. The doctor said her dementia has progressed significantly. Living alone is becoming difficult, so the possibility of her moving into a facility was suggested. Knowing how much my mother dislikes being alone, I consider a facility as a last resort. So, as long as it's possible, I've decided to live with her at my parents' house. Oh. Where did Maggie go? Is she at home? While I'm folding laundry, my mother suddenly asks about Maggie. Maggie is my younger sister, 2 years my junior. Mom, Maggie got married and doesn't live here anymore. Really? Is that so? Was Maggie old enough for that? She seems to remember Maggie, but has forgotten that both of us are already in our 50s and married. Every day, she sees my face, aged appropriately, but still often fails to understand how old we are. Sometimes, she regresses memories from my childhood and starts telling me, "Don't use the fire, it's dangerous," as I begin to prepare dinner. Where is Maggie? I want to see her. Occasionally, she expresses a desire to see Maggie. However, I don't ask Maggie to come home because she seems reluctant to be near our house. Maggie doesn't seem to like our mother or me very much. When I told her about our mother's dementia, she just said, "Let your sister, who's a caretaker, handle it," and hasn't shown any concern or visited since. Feeling sorry for my mother, I asked Scott, Maggie's husband, if they could both come and visit our family home. However, he coldly refused, saying, "That's impossible. Taking care of a mother-in-law in such a condition would be a waste of both time and money." Hey, Mom. It's getting a bit cold, isn't it? Are you okay? Do you want me to get you a jacket? Seeing my mother looking out the window with a hint of sadness, my heart aches. I try to distract her with a smile and a different topic, which seems to reduce the frequency of her mentioning Maggie. Then, one day when I was off work and spending a calm day with my mother, Maggie suddenly returned home. "Hey, are you there, big sis?" Her first words upon her unexpected return were these. I was truly surprised, especially since she had been so resistant to visiting. I immediately went to the entrance where Maggie was. Maggie, whom I hadn't seen in a while, was dressed glamorously and the scent of perfume filled the area near the entrance. "Maggie, what brings you here all of a sudden?" Without any proper greetings, I blurted out what was on my mind. Maggie looked me up and down and then snorted mockingly. "I have a little favor to ask you, sis. That's why I came all the way here." I had a rough idea of what Maggie's favor might be, which made me sigh deeply. "Maggie, you're not going to ask for a loan again, are you?" Sis, you guessed it. Exactly that. Please, can you lend me some money? Since when had Maggie started asking me for money? Despite disliking me and our mother, she shamelessly asks for money. But, since I don't want her borrowing from dubious sources, I've been unable to refuse her requests for money. Ha! How much? About $1,000, please. What? $1,000? Didn't I lend you about $2,000 just the other time? Maggie, what are you using it for? Maggie didn't respond to my pressing questions. Instead, she looked away, seeming embarrassed. It's none of your business what I use it for. Just lend it to me, will you? Eventually, Maggie started to lose her temper. Even so, I didn't have much extra money myself. Seeing me silent and not responding, Maggie clicked her tongue in annoyance and entered the house, heading toward the living room. Worried, I followed her. Ah. There she is. Mom, lend me some money. My bad feeling was confirmed when Maggie headed straight to where our mother was. Watching TV, our mother turned towards Maggie's voice. Oh, isn't that Maggie? Welcome back. Mother smiled warmly at Maggie, seemingly oblivious to what Maggie had just said. Ah, yes, yes. Mom, give me some money. Maggie, apparently irritated by our mother's smile and words, clicked her tongue and reached out her hand demandingly. Maggie! What are you doing? Stop it! I was shocked by Maggie's behavior and hurriedly intervened between them. With me standing in front of our mother, Maggie couldn't get closer. Annoyed even more, she glared at me. Hey, sis, don't get in the way, okay? If you're going to do that, then you lend me the money. It's just $1,000. Just $1,000? I felt frustrated at my inability to scold Maggie for such remarks. Listen. You can't just ask for $1,000 like it's nothing. I don't have that much on me. Look, I'll lend you this much, so please let it be. I opened my wallet in exasperation and handed over the $200 I had to Maggie. She snatched the money and quickly put it in her purse. What can I do with only this much? Despite borrowing money, Maggie complained under her breath. No matter what I say, it seems to come back to me tenfold, so I couldn't bring myself to argue back. Maggie, what's wrong? Are you having money troubles? Then, should I give you my $20 million? Our mother, who had been watching our exchange, said this with a smile. $20 million? Wait, Mom. What are you talking about? Hearing about $20 million, Maggie's previously sullen face brightened up rapidly. Mom. Where did you get such a huge amount of money? It's the money your father left behind. I can't use it, so Gina and Maggie should divide it between yourselves. Mother continued talking as if she understood everything and saw no problem. I was at a loss for words, feeling as if all strength had left my body. Sis. Is it true? Did you know about it? What are you talking about? There's no way there's such a huge amount of money. Just go home for today. Upon hearing about the possibility of a huge sum of money, Maggie's eyes sparkled, but I pulled her away from our mother and forcibly took her to the entrance. I thought it was a waste of time for her to talk more with our mother, as nothing new would come out or happen. However, Maggie seemed fixated on the $20 million our mother mentioned and was restless. Despite her repeatedly asking me about it, I brushed it off and ushered her outside. Fine, I'll make do with just $200 today, but next time I come, I want to hear all about the $20 million. As I remained silent, Maggie gave up and left. After Maggie left, I felt incredibly weighed down by fatigue. Without being able to blame my mother for mentioning the $20 million, I went to bed with indescribable emotions. Since then, Maggie, believing our mother had $20 million, started calling and visiting more frequently. Correspondingly, my exhaustion kept building up. Come on, sis. It's time you tell me about the $20 million. Are you trying to keep it all to yourself and not tell me? I'm our mother's child too, so I have a right to it. She said this while I was preparing dinner, without offering to help. Finally, my irritation exploded. Maggie, if you have time to talk about that, why don't you take care of our mother for a change? All you ever talk about is money, money, money. Can't you worry about our mother's health even a little? In my anger, I slammed the knife I was holding down onto the chopping board. Maggie, not used to seeing me raise my voice, was visibly shaken. Huh? You said you would take care of her. Why do I have to do it? I'm not involved in this. Despite my anger, Maggie didn't understand and started yelling back. At this point, the conversation was pointless. I gave up, resigned to the futility, and turned my gaze back to the knife and chopping board, continuing my dinner preparations. Ignoring Maggie's continued ranting, I decided to maintain my silence regarding the $20 million, as my headache only worsened with her voice. The next day, when it was time to go to work, I got up and headed to the entrance, only to find Maggie there, seemingly deep in thought. Hey, Maggie. What are you doing here so early in the morning? Maggie seemed surprised when I spoke to her as if she hadn't noticed me. The other day, you told me to worry about our mother a bit, so I reflected on that. I thought maybe I'd spend the day with her today. I was surprised to hear such words from Maggie and took a moment to comprehend them. I had repeatedly told her to change her attitude towards our mother, but this was unexpected. What could have happened to Maggie overnight? I doubted a storm would come today, as the sun was shining warmly enough to heat the room. I think Mom would be happy about that. I won't be here because of work, but I'll be back by lunchtime. Can you take care of her for a few hours? The usual helper comes at 9, so please greet them properly. With no time to spare, as I was running late, I asked Maggie to look after our mother and left the house. Truth be told, I felt anxious about leaving our mother in Maggie's care. Can she take care of our mother? Knowing the usual Maggie, I couldn't help but worry. But considering Maggie's age, I hoped it was just unnecessary anxiety. Pushing aside my worries and concerns, I headed to work. Exceptionally, I finished work past noon that day and didn't get home until after 2 p.m. Trying to calm my eagerness, I hurried home, only to realize how foolish I was to trust Maggie when I saw the state of the house. What is this? What happened? As I opened the entrance, I saw that everything from the living room to our mother's room was in disarray, almost as if a burglar had entered. The culprit, however, was Maggie, who was still rummaging through things. Maggie! What are you doing? What happened? I shouted at Maggie, who was pulling out drawers from shelves and dressers and turning them upside down to empty their contents, but she didn't stop what she was doing. Why are you doing this? Why? I'm just wondering where the $20 million island. Gina, where did you hide the bank book with $20 million? Seeing Maggie's stern face as she rifled through the papers she had pulled out of the drawers, I felt dizzy and almost collapsed. Maggie. Is this why you came this morning? Taking advantage of the fact that I'd be at work at least until noon. I felt foolish for having been slightly happy, thinking Maggie had reformed. I immediately brushed off Maggie's hands and started picking up the scattered papers. Ouch! What are you doing? It's your fault for not saying anything about the $20 million all this time. I felt anger towards Maggie, who was sulking and sighing behind me as I cleaned up. Listen. There's no way that amount of money exists. What, $20 million? Be realistic. If we had that kind of money, we wouldn't be struggling like this. Liar. Mom just said she deposited $20 million in the bank. Maggie. Have you forgotten? Mom has dementia, remember? Sometimes she doesn't even clearly recognize us. Don't take her words at face value in such a condition. I reached my limit with Maggie's unreasonable behavior and yelled loudly, immediately regretting it. These were words I had been holding back, not wanting to shock Mom if she heard them. But surely she must know that our mother is right nearby. When I looked at our mother, she was staring at me with wide eyes. Ah. Mom, I'm sorry. That was all I could say as I looked down. That day, Maggie left the house without cleaning up the mess. I stayed behind, overwhelmed with regret and guilt, tidying up the chaotic room alongside my mother. Mother didn't say anything, but I could see in her eyes that she was hurt. However, regardless of my worries, she treated me the same as always, perhaps having forgotten the incident. Several months passed since then, and I hadn't heard from Maggie. Just when I thought she had given up, she suddenly showed up at the house with her husband. Maggie, what's with these bags? What's going on? I was already surprised to see them as a couple at our parents' house for the first time, but they also had large bags with them. Additionally, outside the entrance was a moving truck and movers. We're going to live in this house from today, so Gina, you can go back to your place. What are you suddenly saying? You can't just decide something like this. Gina, you're being unfair. You say you're working, but you've been living off Mom's money, right? With $20 million, there's no way you'd seriously work. You didn't tell me because you've already been using that money, right? I was shocked by her words as she placed her luggage next to me and spoke coldly. I was baffled at how she could say I wasn't working. What kind of thought process was this? Yes, the pension is Mom's money, but it's a mere pittance. True, I use it for living expenses and medical bills, but it's not enough, and I cover the rest with my earnings. How did you come to that conclusion, Maggie? It's unreasonable to just show up and say that. Gina, you're annoying. We're going to live with Mom from today. You're lying unemployed, so leave. We'll take care of the caregiving and inherit everything. Since you've been using Mom's money until now, you don't need it, right? Maggie said this as if it were a parting shot and walked into the house. Scott glanced coldly at me as he followed her, snorting dismissively. Maggie, what are you thinking? Taking care of Mom isn't that simple, you know? And cohabiting. What about the house you were living in? As the movers made noise entering, I chased after Maggie, raising my voice. Maggie, ignoring our mother, sat down in the living room and responded to my question without even looking at Mom. The house? I sold that. Because, you know, we have $20 million, so we don't need it. Hearing those words, I felt dizzy again. Really, what is she thinking? Acting impulsively without considering the consequences, I was so dumbfounded I couldn't find the words. Astonishingly, she could do such a thing without even confirming if the $20 million exists. Gina, how long are you planning to stay? Just gather your things and leave today. Faced with Maggie's selfishness and her intense presumptions, I was so weary that I couldn't even muster the energy to argue or talk back. She's underestimating the care of our mother, so let her learn the hard way. I felt nothing but apathy towards Maggie. Fine. I've warned you clearly. Do as you please. You'll understand soon enough how hard it is to care for a mother with dementia. And I'm telling you again, there's no such thing as the $20 million mom mentioned. As I said this, I took out our mother's bankbook that I had been keeping and placed it in front of Maggie. Maggie's eyes lit up as if she had finally gotten what she wanted, and she picked up the bankbook and opened it. Gina's mom's current balance is 20 cents. Even if this house is sold, including the value of the land, it won't bring in more than 5 million yen. My husband hasn't been sending money because she's my mother. I've been barely scraping by on my earnings. Do your best, that's all I can say. As I told this to Maggie, who turned pale and froze upon seeing the bankbook, I gathered my belongings and left my parents' house. I had reached my limit with Maggie, and with the care of our mother and work, perhaps I was mentally overloaded and not thinking straight. Even so, I thought it was good for Maggie to experience the difficulties of caregiving. I had been considering placing our mother in a facility as her care was becoming too much to handle and had wanted to discuss it with my husband. Returning to my own home was a good opportunity for me. The night I returned home, I vented to my husband and confided everything to him. Despite having just met after a long time, he kindly accepted my immediate venting. After pouring out my pent-up feelings, tears welled up in my eyes. Gina, welcome back. You've been through a lot. Well done. You did your best. Without giving his own opinion, my husband just nodded and comforted me with his words. Something inside me thawed with his words, and I couldn't stop my tears. Maybe I had reached my limit without realizing it. Even though I faced dementia patients in my work as a caregiver, dealing with my mother was different. Perhaps there was a part of me that didn't want to accept the reality of her progressing dementia. Additionally, Maggie's selfish actions pushed me over the edge. Yet, I hadn't recognized the signs that I was mentally overwhelmed, or maybe I just didn't want to admit it. Gina, it's okay. Maggie will surely understand your feelings too. Just rest for today. Tomorrow, let's talk to the doctor and the care manager about the facility. Saying this, he handed me a tissue to wipe my tears, and his kindness gradually calmed me down. Considering placing Mom in a facility, I thought Maggie would agree easily, but it was pointless to think about that now. As my husband suggested, I decided to prepare for her admission after consulting with the professionals. For several days, I was busy with consultations and visits to facilities after work, a different kind of busyness from caring for my mother. During this time, I didn't hear from Maggie at all, but I did receive one call from the helper. Maggie had told her, "You don't need to come anymore." She called to confirm if this was okay. Although I thought Maggie was again acting unilaterally, considering she said she would take care of the caregiving, I assured the helper that it would be fine if Maggie had said so. Without the helper, Maggie would realize how hard it is. She didn't understand the reality of it. A few days passed, and suddenly, Maggie started contacting me frequently. I had forgotten how long it had been since I left the family home, and I initially ignored her calls because I was still angry. But she kept calling persistently. Considering the possibility that something might have happened to our mother, I finally answered the phone. Maggie's voice on the phone lacked any energy, sounding utterly exhausted. "Maggie, Gina. I can't do this anymore. I can't handle it, so come home, please." I felt genuinely sorry for my mother, but I couldn't help thinking, "Serves you right," towards Maggie's predicament. When Maggie weakly said that, I felt a sense of relief. "What are you saying? You said you'd take care of Mom yourself. You need to take responsibility. Just for today, please. I'm begging you, come over to the house." Knowing the difficulties of caring for our mother, I was tempted to sympathize, but it would defeat the purpose if I gave in now. So, with a heavy heart, I firmly said, "I'm busy, I can't," and refused. If I go to our family home now, Maggie will think she can always rely on me for help. She'll likely come up with excuses to make me take over, and eventually, she'll expect me to be there every day. That wouldn't be good for Maggie, and nothing would change from before. Knowing what would happen, there's no way I could go to help. After refusing, I immediately hung up the phone. Then, right after, I received a call from Scott. As soon as I answered, I was met with Scott's shouting. "What do you think you are doing? Your sister is asking for help, and you refuse to lend a hand. As her sister, you should be more supportive. Why won't you help her?" Without even having a conversation, he yelled and then quickly hung up the phone. Why do I have to be scolded by Scott? It's not his place to say that. If he's so concerned, he should help. Though I didn't want to go immediately after Scott's call, I became worried about our mother and decided to go to our family home. Upon arriving and opening the door, I noticed a slight foul smell. With the helper dismissed by Maggie, it was inevitable, but the house was in a mess. Wait. Maggie. What is this situation? When I went to the living room, I found Maggie lying exhausted on the table, and our mother lying in bed. Gina. You finally came. You're late. Reacting to my voice, Maggie slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were darkened with bags, and her skin lacked its usual luster. She looked nothing like Maggie, who was always particular about beauty and fashion. I don't even want the $20 million anymore. I'll settle for half, $10 million. Gina, please, come back and take care of Mom every day like before. I was utterly dismayed by Maggie, who even in this state, continued to talk about money. Despite showing her the bank book and repeatedly saying there was no $20 million, she still didn't understand. Realizing that not telling Maggie the truth about $20 million might endanger our mother, I sat down in front of her. I've said it many times, there's no $20 million. You saw the bank book, right? Why can't you understand? Maggie, the $20 million that Mom talks about was already spent by Dad. What? Spent? What do you mean? Indeed, our mother once had $20 million in assets. However, this was right after our grandparents, her parents, passed away. Our grandfather was a wealthy man, so after he and our grandmother died, our mother, being their only child, inherited their fortune, leaving her with $20 million. However, my father's business incurred heavy losses, putting the company in debt. At the brink of bankruptcy, my mother used $20 million to help. Although Dad's business eventually recovered with her help, the $20 million never returned. I learned about this just before Dad passed away, during a conversation with Mom. It was a conversation before she developed dementia, so there's no mistake about it. No. What have I been doing? Finally believing my story, Maggie was stunned, her strength drained from her. Even if there were $20 million left, what were you planning to do with all that money? Actually, I have debts. What? Debts? Why? It was then that I first learned Maggie, who loved designer brands, had accumulated debt from buying them. To afford new items, she would pawn the older ones, but since they sold for less than she bought them for, she borrowed the shortfall from me. Also, Scott had a gambling habit and had spent a significant amount, resulting in a total debt of about $50,000. If the $20 million had been available and used to pay off the debts, there would have been a considerable sum left. The plan was to put our mother in a facility and use the rest to buy a house for themselves. The thought of having so much money that I wouldn't need to work and could just extravagantly spend it all was her plan. I was truly angry listening to her. Such a simplistic and frustrating mindset. Actually, there's more. Scott seems to have embezzled money from his workplace. So, we're really in trouble. I was planning to use the money we got to pay it back. Wait, what? I can't quite process this. What did you just say? The earlier part of the conversation sounded like a typical fantasy. However, the revelation that followed was beyond my expectations. You mean embezzlement? Yes. The company already found out, but the bosses said they won't press charges if he returns the full amount. Embezzling, yet not being charged if the full amount is returned? I've never heard of such a lenient arrangement. Just to be clear, how much did he embezzle? I think it was about $1 million. Embezzling such an amount and getting off without any consequences is unheard of. I was speechless, my mind went blank. How have Maggie and Scott been living their lives until now? While thinking about this, I suddenly remembered a story a friend told me. Although different from Maggie's situation, the friend's husband had lied about needing money for his parents to fund his affair. I couldn't help but wonder if Maggie was in a similar situation. Logically, embezzling such a large sum and getting away with it despite being caught by the company is implausible. He would normally be fired and face legal consequences. If it were true, it means either Scott had some leverage over the company's boss, or he was lying to Maggie. I don't want to say this, but Maggie. Could it be that Scott is deceiving you? I was concerned to say this, but Maggie needed to hear it. However, Maggie took my words negatively. She looked up sharply and glared at me. Gina. What do you mean by that? That's so rude. Calm down, Maggie. Listen, the story doesn't add up. Embezzlement with no consequences if repaid? That's a company-wide issue. It sounds like Scott is lying. Stop it, Gina. There's no way Scott would deceive me. Maggie slammed the table and showed her emotions openly. Once she got like this, it was impossible to reason with her. I sighed lightly, picked up my bag, and stood up. It's none of my business, but you can't take care of Mom anymore. Given her condition, it's no longer feasible to care for her at home. I'll make arrangements for her to be admitted to a care facility. You can do as you please with this house. I'll contact you again when Mom's admission date is set. With that, I left my family home. Several months after this incident, we found a suitable facility, and Mom started living there. Maggie continued living in the family home, but as her debts became unmanageable, she ended up having to sell the house. Still burdened with debts, she moved to a much smaller apartment. Can you lend me money? She occasionally contacted me with such requests. However, I had no more feelings or anything to offer Maggie, so I blocked her number. About a year after Mom was admitted and I had blocked Maggie's number, she visited my house once. Maggie appeared emaciated, her once well-cared-for appearance and sense of style completely gone, a pitiful sight. Help me. Gina. I just can't anymore. Barely squeezing out the words, tears filled Maggie's eyes, on the verge of spilling over. So, I decided to at least hear her out. It turned out my suspicions were correct. Scott had been having an affair with a woman 10 years his junior and had been squandering money on her. Once Maggie realized there was no inheritance and no forthcoming money, things spiraled down. Reluctantly selling the house, Maggie had to use all the proceeds to pay off her debts, leaving her with no money at her disposal. Having no more money to borrow from me, Scott realized Maggie had lost her utility to him. Easily and without remorse, he discarded her, leading to their divorce. Gina, I've been cheated on, divorced, and now I have no home, no money. Could I stay here just for a little while? I'll find a job and leave as soon as I can. Please. Honestly, seeing Maggie in that state, I felt pity and wanted to help her. But this house isn't mine alone, so I told her I couldn't answer until I had discussed it with my husband. We decided to wait for him to come home. When my husband returned and I explained the situation, he strongly opposed it. What have you done for Gina all this time? Do you forget how much she has taken care of you? Gina took care of your mother while you sought help but were pushed away by you. Housework, job, caregiving for your mother. Do you know how hard Gina has worked? Even then, you just took money from her and did nothing. Coming here only when it suits you, how dare you? Sort it out yourself. I never expected my gentle husband, who had never raised his voice before, to be so furious. Although I was shocked by his reaction, I couldn't say anything. Maggie probably thought my kind-hearted husband would surely accept her. But seeing his unexpected reaction, she left the house silently and dejectedly after showing a bewildered expression. Why were you so harsh? I wondered if he had been too harsh, considering Maggie's appearance. However, his words must have come from his love and concern for me. Gina, you're too good-hearted. Being kind isn't always right. Your kindness might encourage people to take advantage, to not realize the gravity of their wrongdoings. You've been tormented by Maggie to your limit, haven't you? Yet, were you still planning to help her? And to continue taking care of her indefinitely? Your kindness is only harmful to Maggie. His words hit me hard. Indeed, if I had accepted Maggie, she wouldn't have appreciated the gesture and would have continued to impose on me, thinking it was her right as a sister. My kindness was indeed harmful to Maggie. I'm sorry, you're right. I was thinking too simplistically. It wouldn't have been good for Maggie. Thank you for pointing it out. After I responded, my husband returned to his usual gentle demeanor and treated me as he normally would. Since then, the topic of Maggie has never come up between us again. With the time I have, I visit my mother as much as I can, finding joy in the time we spend together now that I have more emotional freedom. What happened to Maggie afterward, I don't know. Occasionally, my mother mentions her name, but soon she might forget that too. I understand that one day she might forget me as well. I know it in my head, but the thought constricts my heart. I wonder how much time we have left until that happens. Until then, I plan to create as many memories as possible with my mother.